Impact measurement. Well, I've been working on this with SEEE and through other organisations for about 10 years now. And it kind of started off when at a SEEE board meeting, we all sat round one day and said, well, what do you use this tool for? And when do you use that one? And what's the difference between social return on investment and a social audit? And you know, not to blow our own trumpet too much, but we thought, well, actually, if those of us sitting around this table don't know the answer to that, then how is a new small social enterprise going to have any idea how to find out about this? So eventually, over a period of 2 or 3 years, there was some funding available to do some research into what's out there, who's using it, what are they using it for? So that started to answer our question, and I was involved in some of that research. And we worked with Middlesex University, and through the project, they said, well, actually, we've got not just stuff for a research report, we've got some useful information for people here. So with that, we wrote a guide to getting started in impact measurement, managed to get a bit more funding to do some training, and we worked with a number of organisations, and also to do some diagnostics in 20 small organisations. And when we did diagnostics, what we found was that the people needed something before they were steered towards the right tool. And they needed something to help them get ready to measure impact, because there are loads of tools out there. And people always say to me, what do we need another tool for? There are loads of tools out there. And I say, well, actually, this isn't a tool specifically to measure your interest. It's to think about what information you've got, how you manage it, what that might be telling you about what you need to measure. And then you can go on and use one of the bigger tools, because a lot of them, people just look at them and think, well, I haven't got any of that stuff. I mean, I haven't got a database with all our users in them. You know, I haven't got all of that stuff in place. And it then seems such a big job to start to use those tools. So they don't. And then people end up doing nothing. And our toolbox has been designed to fill that gap. So to help you identify what it is you need to have in place in order to be able to systematically and robustly measure the impact of your organisation. So I'm going to share my screen now, and what I'm going to do is talk you through what we worked out from all of this research and diagnostics and training with things. There's 5 foundations of measuring impact, and then after that I'm going to talk you through the toolbox and explain what that does. So hopefully this will go okay. Okay, so that's what we're doing. And the idea about this toolbox, as I've just said, it's come out of that development training, listening to people. And so what we've designed it to be is something that is, it's about the planning and preparation for measuring impact. It can be used by small or large organisations. And I especially want to emphasise the small, because it is designed so that absolutely anyone can use it. You don't have to know a lot about research methodology or understand the language. We've used plain English all the way through, and we had it stress tested by all sorts of people to say, I don't understand that word, why are you saying that? You know, and people who weren't in our sector at all. So we think we've made it as plain language as possible. The idea is that the measurement is undertaken by a small group in your organisation. You can have one person doing it, but the idea is that you can bring people together, maybe people from different teams or different departments, or just people with a different perspective and different skill sets to bring together. And then you share that understanding of impact measurement across the organisation. It's a practical tool. That's why we've called it a toolbox. It's not something you read and have to read and understand and then think about how you apply it. It's about application. This is how you do this. This is what you do next. What we're promoting today is the online version, which is new. We're sort of in the middle of a soft launch now. There's a caveat to that. There's still some work being done on it, which I'll mention in a minute. But we have had a hard copy, an actual physical toolbox. Way back. This is it. And that's been in operation. We've had that for about 10 years, and it's been refreshed, obviously, for the online copy. And as I said, it's clear language and easy to use. So why we developed it, I've just mentioned. We did some research into what tools were out there. Then we did some training with over 300 organisations and 20 detailed diagnostics. And we realised that we needed to start from the basics and not make any assumptions. I've put one of my favourite quotes in here because it sort of sums up what we were trying to do, really. And it's a quote from Mark Twain, the American writer. And I use this all the time, which is, he said, "I apologise for such a long letter. I didn't have time to write a short one." And if you want to just go bleh and tell everybody everything you know, you can do it, and it's quite easy to do. But sometimes it takes a really long time, and it's really hard for people to filter out what the important bits are. We've done a lot of work on this toolbox so that we have written a short letter so that it's condensed and it's very specific. So that's really what we've been aiming to do. So it means that we've left stuff out, but we've tried to refer you on to other places where you can get stuff that we haven't covered, because it is designed to be something very specific. Okay, so as a result of doing all this background work, Helen, who was my co-worker at the time, who's now Dr. Helen, she's now an academic, although not a wordy academic, so that's good. And she and I worked up these 5 foundations. So the first thing is to have clarity of purpose. If you want to measure what you're doing, you have to be clear what that is. That may sound like stating the obvious, but actually, a lot of organisations set up to solve a problem, and they're so focused on the problem and they can see it so clearly. I'm working with an organisation that's doing it now, and it's really hard. They do a brilliant job, but it's really hard for them to articulate and to state clearly what it is that they're there to do. And sometimes that's reflected because it's just, well, whatever these people need, we'll do it for them. But why is it that you're there? So you need clarity of purpose. You need a clear statement of what it is that you're intending to do. If we're working with a load of homeless people, we want them to be rehoused. We want them to be able to take on and sustain tenancy of their own accommodation. That's our purpose. So everything you measure after that is going to be to see where you're getting people towards their ability to take on and sustain a tenancy. And if you're not clear about your purpose, then it's very hard to measure whether you've achieved it or not. Have you got a destination in sight, and will you be able to tell when you've got there? You will already be collecting a lot of data. Everybody does. I mean, if you're a funded organisation, funders ask you to collect loads of data. Sometimes you wonder reasonably why you're collecting this particular bit of data. Or sometimes it's really frustrating that everybody wants you to collect the same sort of things, but in a slightly different way. And data collection becomes a very reactive thing. And I think because of that, it's something that a lot of people resent doing. I always say to people about measuring impact, it helps you to be in charge of your own narrative. You get to tell other people what it is that's important about what you do. You don't have to wait and say, we want you to count this. A funder will say, we want you to count this, and you'll say, but that's only a very small part of what we do. And this gives you an opportunity to say, this is the whole picture, this is what we do. And it's a proactive, engaged process that helps you tell your story to the people that you want to influence or get funding from. But you will already be collecting stuff, and that's always the starting point. We're not saying you need to set up a whole new data collection system. We're just saying, look at what you've got, refine it, see if it's telling you what you need to know. Are there gaps? In which case, how do you fill them? So starting with what you've got is really important. We also stick by the principle of real stakeholder involvement, making sure that you have asked the people that you are working with what changes for them. Impact measurement is all about change. It's where it differs from monitoring or evaluation. It's about saying, and what has changed? And sometimes you don't know what has changed for people unless you've asked them, because you can have all sorts of objectives of things that you're going to achieve through your project. But if you ask people, they'll often tell you things that have happened that you had no idea of. And Helen, my colleague, always talked about a case when she was working with, it was a parenting project, helping parents who had children who had sort of ADHD kind of behavioural problems. And she was talking about what had changed with this list of questions. And she always asked, you know, and has anything else changed for you? And one woman said, I sleep so much better now. And it's really helped me because I'm less stressed, I sleep better, and then I can cope better with my son because, you know, I'm not so short-tempered, and I feel better because I'm sleeping better. And sleeping better is a major thing that's happened to me as a result of this project. And so Helen started to ask all the subsequent people that she interviewed, how do you sleep? And they'd say, oh, it's so much better. And they wouldn't have known this if they hadn't asked somebody. And it turned out to be a really important factor for the individuals. So always asking open questions, asking people what difference your project makes is really important. So you have to ask the right questions. And I so often turn up in organisations and say, do you get any user feedback? And they get, yeah, loads. We've got loads. Here's a book. They've written all these things in. And it said, oh, I had a lovely time, and Mary was the best trainer I've ever had, and I really enjoyed the lunch. And I'm sorry to be brutal about this. Honestly, I don't care. I mean, clearly, that's not quite true. And it's really important that people feel that like the trainer and enjoy the space and have a good time. But actually, that tells me nothing about the impact of that project. If you're running a training course, what do people do as a result of having attended it? That is the key question. And you want to know that if you are trying to house the homeless, that somebody has either got a tenancy, or they've moved into a hostel, or they've stayed in a hostel for longer than they've ever stayed before, or they've reduced their alcohol consumption, or they've started to manage their money better, or a lot of different things that will tell you that something has changed. And these are all very specific things. And it's not about, do they feel better? That can be helpful, but it's really about the specific things that have changed. That's the wording that you need to get into your questions. And then knowing what you can and can't tell from the evidence. You do have to be quite cautious about what the evidence is telling you. I do look at a lot of evaluation reports and think, really? Is that true? Is it as many as that? How many have you counted? I often get data sent to me where it says we've run 32 sessions and they were attended by 40 people. And I think, okay, did those 40 people attend every one of those 32 sessions? Did 2 people attend every one of those 32 sessions? And the other, I can't remember how many I said, the rest of them just did 1. That doesn't really tell me very much. So you need to be transparent about what you're inferring from your data, and what you are telling other people about it. Always err on the side of the lower number, something that you can absolutely validate. Don't go for this is the highest possible number it might be, because if somebody challenges you, you won't be able to justify that. Always be cautious and say it's possibly more, but we haven't got hard evidence for that, but we can definitely say it's this number. And that always instills more trust than, well, we think it might be this. And I always think, really, are you sure? So you need to sort of be sure that the changes that are being created are attributable to what you're doing. So if somebody's been very stressed and using self-medicating in a number of ways, and you think it's because of your project, it could be because they had an aggressive neighbour who's moved out. It could be because they've fallen in love with somebody. It could be because they've fallen out of love with somebody and left an abusive partner. It could be anything at all that is totally unconnected with your project. So you do need to make sure that you've got that kind of attribution in there. And then you have to think about, is anybody or anything else contributing to these changes? So be clear and transparent about what you can tell from your evidence. So those are our foundations. So I'm gonna sort of carry on going through now, and then we'll know exactly how long we've got for questions at the end. So if you have questions, save them up, put them in the chat, or and we'll come back to them later. So our idea was to work on this, was to set up what we called a consultant in a box, because it really is about your own organisation working through this as if you had somebody there helping you, suggesting what you do next, suggesting ways forward. But maybe you can't afford to have a consultant for 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 days to help you with this, but it's a one-off payment that you can then do it yourself. That's the idea. You've probably all got the question, how much is this? But we'll come back to that later. So I don't know why I've got, oh, sorry. I need to go into another bit of sharing now. Sorry, I think I'm going to have to come out of this slideshow and go back into my link, because I thought I had linked into the toolbox and clearly I haven't. So I'm sorry about that.
Don't worry, Nicky.
Oh no, hang on a minute. I think I've got it. Yes, here we are.
Fab.
Right. Okay, so here we are. This is an introduction to our online toolbox, and what I'm going to do is sort of basically show you how it works. I'm not going to go through every section. We haven't got time, and I think that would be quite dull. But the idea, there is a landing page which sort of takes you into the entry, but you log in, and then this is what you get. So there are 6 sections, and I'll talk you through those in a minute, and you can go direct from this page into every section. But the first content that you see is how to use this site. We've talked here about the functionality of the online version, because there are sort of 2 things. There is how the online version works, and then there's how the toolbox works. So the first bit is really about how to get to the places you want to go, how to do the things you want to do, and the way to navigate and negotiate your way around the toolbox. And then it takes you into the section called Getting Started, which describes how the toolbox works. So the 6 sections, the first one is about collecting information, looking at what you've already got and what you need to use, and helping you identify what the gaps are. The second section, section B, is about looking at who to involve. Who do you need to talk to? Who is being who is being engaged by your organisation, who do you need to speak to, who are the other stakeholders, and what questions will you need to ask them. Section C is conversations about change. That's about thinking about what change looks like to the people that you're working with. And that's partly about that linking to the clarity of purpose. What do we think change looks like? We've spoken to people, so we know what change looks like for them. How can we make sure we've framed our questions properly and make sure that we're asking people the right questions, which is going to give us a chance to get the whole picture from the people who we work with. Section D, identifying outcomes to measure, that looks at your theory of change. So what is it we're trying to achieve? And then we can work back from that, look at what outcomes are that are going to tell us whether we've achieved that change or not. We can have a quick glance at these later. And then processing information, that's really about that, what you can and can't tell from your evidence. How do you manage your data? What other resources are available? And there are various points in the materials where you can get links to other tools and other sections. We link to the RBAC community research tool, for example, if you need to learn more about research methods. And then section F is where you tie everything you've done together as a systematic plan. So you feed all the information from the previous 5 sections and say, okay, this is where we've got to. So as I've mentioned before, the principles are that several heads are better than one. So most activities are designed to be done in a group, although there is a bit of individual reading and thinking, only reading short bits though, I must stress. It's about doing things that are going to save you time later. It's about putting things into practice. We've broken the toolbox down into separate sections, so you don't have to do everything at once, and you don't have to do it on all of your organisation. You can pick a service area or a section or an activity or a project and do that and use the toolbox for that. You don't have to do it on the whole of the organisation at one time, because I think that can become overwhelming if you've got lots of activity strands. You can use it in any order, and we advise you on how to choose your starting point. And again, don't be too it sometimes helps to refresh on things you think you know, rather than leaping into the first bit you think you don't. You might need to revisit some of the earlier sections as you go through. It's important that you're open and honest with yourselves. It's an internal process. Nobody else is going to look at it. It's important to be truthful. Where there are problems, where there have been failures, where you're not doing as well as you'd hoped, be honest with yourselves as a group. Don't do a positive spin on it all the time. No one else is going to know this, because unless you're honest about those things, you won't be able to deal with them. Think about how much time and resource you want to spend on this. Don't go overboard. You will drive. It will then seem a pointless exercise. Be proportionate. I've already said, don't overclaim. Be confident that you could verify your results to a skeptical third party. You know your organisation well, you'll have a good idea of the sense of it. You might be pleasantly surprised, you might be worried, but you kind of will have a broad idea about where you're at. And if you're not where you are, think quite hard about what the evidence is telling you, because you could have got it wrong, and it's worth going back and checking if you think it's coming out madly out. And then it's about learning the right words for social impact measurement. It doesn't assume you know them, but it's about learning them as you go through. So what do? You do individual reading and thinking. There are short sections for you to read and think about and discuss with colleagues. Then it suggests you have a group discussion on what we call your impact group. And then there are some activities that you do together as a group, and we'll look at one of them in a minute. So this is kind of what it looks like. And then your first decision to make is where to start, and it gives you some statements, and you have to sort of select the one that most suits your organisation, and then decide where you start. And then we suggest how you form your impact team, and you choose one person to become your administrator for the project. And the administrator does have a bit more to do on the online tool. So the administrator, I wouldn't say it's essential, but it's preferable that the administrator is a bit is reasonably confident, but going to be confident about using the online materials. So we suggest how you go about that, and also keeping momentum up so that you don't leave too long between your activities, because otherwise you could sort of forget where you'd got to and it all becomes a bit difficult. So we say sort of 2 to 3 weeks between each activity or discussion. So it could take you 6 months to get through the whole toolbox, but it will be going at your pace, and it will be integrated with your activities, and it will be at a pace that suits you and your team. So once you've done all of that, you can go to section A. So we'll have a look at section A. So section A, we've already said, is about collecting information. It tells you what's in this the introduction tells you what's in this section, what you'll have to do. There's going to be an activity sheet that you need to go and look at. And by the end of it, you'll have a written grid showing what monitoring information the organisation holds and where there are gaps, and an action plan for how to deal with those gaps. So this is the pre-reading section. Okay, that was it. All right. So when we talk about reading sections, they are short. They are there to prompt you to think. It doesn't say you've got to go away and read 3 chapters by Thursday. So if you're not, or you don't think everybody in your team is a great reader, then don't worry about it. I think one of the things we wanted to do with the work with the toolbox is, we know that a lot of impact measurement tools are designed by academics. They're designed by people, and I have to say I am one of these people, who get really excited by data crunching and are a bit of a wonk about this. But we recognise that most people who use them are not like that at all. They're not people who want to go away and read a book. They're activists. They're people who do something. So we've made it that's why we've made it as practical as possible. So this is the introduction to it. And then you have to do a little bit of thinking. So if we asked you to tell us about the last 6 months, exactly what your organisation has done and how many people were involved, how much information would you have readily to hand? Would you be able to get it, but it would take an effort? Would you be able to find it for bits of your organisation where a funder's made you do it? Or would you think, oh, I don't know anything about that bit at all? Is it all on paper that never got onto a database because somebody never got round to doing that? I mean, we recognise these are the realities of life. People are very overstretched, particularly at the moment. Sometimes you haven't, you wanted to do it, but with the best will in the world, you haven't. So, so we then go into another reading section, which is just, again, considering some issues, thinking about what the situation is in your organisation, and what sort of background information you might need. So you might need to know where although these aren't specifically about impact, you might need to know a profile of the people that you're working with, the demographic details. You might need to know about what their needs are, if anybody has any health problems, any special dietary needs, if you're providing them with lunch, that kind of thing. You might need to know where they're from, which geographic area they cover. If you're doing a place-based activity, you might need to check that they're from that area, or it might just be interesting to you to know where people are coming from. You might need participant permissions. You might need data protection permissions. It might be about you contacting other agencies on their behalf. You might need permissions from a carer or a parent. You might need permission if you're going to take photos of people. So these are things that you might, bits of information you might want to collect. And then all of that goes onto an activity sheet, which looks a bit like this. And in section A, we've given you a sample version here, where you can see the kinds of ways you need to answer each section. And then you go into section A. Sorry, we are still doing some work on this, and actually the link to these activity sheets has proved to be the most difficult thing that we've had to do. So this is still a bit of a work in progress, and so I was slightly holding my breath to make sure that we got there and it looked okay. It doesn't look quite as nice as the PDF version that you've just seen, but we still need to do some work on that. So this is then the section where you complete your own information, and then that saves into your toolbox there. So I'm afraid I can't show you that in any more detail at the moment, because it'll be another week or so before it's finished, but that's effectively what it looks like. And then you basically each member of the group will write their name above one of the worksheets so that you can see who's done the work and whose version is which, and then it all gets stored in the same place. Then the idea is that the administrator can then produce a sort of master copy, which is a distillation of what everybody else has contributed. It's up to you whether you do that or not. But then, so there are several versions of this, and it goes down. So that's what the section looks like. They are all broadly like that, where you're collecting information and submitting it. And then, but there are some other activities, and I want to show you section E here. Is it going to? Sorry, it was quicker, and I'm sure it will be quicker again. Or either that or I didn't click it properly. Section E is about how you process information in your organisation. And it starts off with the absolutely classic conversation we had in one of our diagnostics about us saying you need to be recording information about outcomes, and somebody saying yes we are, we've got distance travelled information for all our course participants, there are 10 outcome questions. And we said that's great, so what have you found out about from all of that information? And the answer was nothing yet, there's piles and piles of forms sitting in that cupboard over there. I think that's what we need to do next. Sorry, I'm just going to move over slightly because the sun's come out. So part of that is about making sure that the right people in your organisation are allocated to do the right jobs. And I think it's so important that that everybody in the organisation is committed to measuring the impact of what you're doing. And that includes frontline staff. Collecting data is not an administrative task. It's finding out how well you're doing and how well your client needs are being met. And that should be everybody's responsibility. So, so we go through, and the activity is about who does what and why. And if we go on to the activity sheet E, which is slightly different from all the others, so there's another step to go through. Now, what you get here is an exercise that you can do on your own or as a group. And it's designed so you've got, and I'm sorry, the print isn't very clear at the moment, but it's in this box here, it says this task provides a guarantee that meaning that I'm going to put my glasses on. Sorry. That meaningful data is being collected. So what task is that? And there are various cards around here in the toolbox, the copy. They are actual cards that you move. And you've got different roles here. And so what you do is work out what job needs to be, reflects that, and then you can move that job into the relevant square. And then underneath it, you can see it says name here and tasks here. And this is where you name the actual person in your organisation to whose job this is going to be, or whose job it currently is. So this is quite a nice active exercise. It's the one we thought was going to be the biggest problem, which proved out not to be. Just having something that was big enough on the screen turned out to be the biggest problem. So, so with that, at the end of that, you have a summary of whose roles are what and who ought to be doing what job in your organisation. So that's what we do in section E. So, and then at the end of the toolbox, there's a thing about what do you do next, what happens next, and then we, of course, ask you to do a feedback questionnaire, because we're measuring impact and we want to know the impact of the toolbox. So we've asked you some feedback questions for you once you've completed the toolbox, which hopefully you will. So that's it. I think we've talked through. I've sort of, I won't shut it down. I'll stop sharing, but I'll keep it open in case we need to go back and look at anything in more detail. But I want to leave us enough time for questions now. So I'll come back to the whole screen. I mean, if people want to put your cameras on, then we can see when you want to speak. So you can either wave or use the hand, one of the reactions icons, and indicate that you want to speak.
Just say it straight away.
Okay.
Any questions? Will anyone want to share where they've got to with their own impact measurements? Rhiannon? Oh, you're on mute, Rhiannon.
I think you've muted them, Jane. Do you need to unmute?
Just one check. Hang on a second.
I had terrible fun and games with this the first time I ever did it, because I was trying to unmute people and they were trying to unmute themselves, and as fast as they were being unmuted, they were being muted again.
Let me just change that.
We still can't hear you.
It says you're unmuted, Rhiannon.
I'll type.
Ah,
yes.
There we are. There you are.
You heard me?
Yeah.
Sorry, I had Dragon software on, so it doesn't. You were coming. I apologise. I didn't realise. Nicky, I was wondering if you had any tips with working with people directly and measuring that social impact, because we're humans. My fear would be I'd never want someone to feel like the process became token, that it was about the organisation and not about them and about their growth. So I was wondering, do you have any tips on how that can remain really authentic and not lose it? Because a lot of these systems can sometimes make people feel like they're a tick box exercise, and it's about the organisation and not about them. And so a lot of social enterprises like to shift that balance and give more power to the people that they're working with. Do you have any tips on how to maintain that integrity?
Yeah, I think it absolutely is about the individuals. And so the very first thing that you want to find out is whether the individuals that you're working with are benefiting from your support, or benefiting in general.
Yeah.
So it absolutely starts with, is something happening for that person? So are they feeling in more control of their life? Are they feeling that they have built relationships with other people that they've met on, you know, say you're running a course. It's not just about what they learn from being on the course, but you want to know that they have learned it and it's been helpful to them. You might want to know other things like, have they got to know other people on the course and that's helped them? Might be that their learning has helped them feel more confident about doing certain tasks or finding out about other information. So it starts with that individual person. What you're doing when you're measuring impact is aggregating all of those individual people to show what's happening across everybody that you support, and that becomes what the change that your organization is making. But it absolutely starts with the individual person. And I think you can gather a lot of information quite carefully without alienating people and without people making feel as if that it's a tick box exercise. So people often say to me, well, you know, I've got vulnerable people here. I can't start asking them a load of questions the minute they come through the door. No, of course you can't. They wouldn't come back. But what you can do is have a chat with them. You know, I'd like to have a general chat. We'd like to sort of find out a little bit about you. And then from that, you can either go away and make a record of that chat afterwards, just so that you've got a little bit of information about them. And then later on, once they feel a bit more comfortable, you can say, you know, could you fill out this questionnaire or could you answer these questions?
So you're talking about formalizing something that you would do
Yeah.
naturally. They're natural things, and it's how to link that in naturally with what the organisation is doing.
And the other things I always suggest are sometimes you can get a lot of information. I mean, we all hate answering long questionnaires, don't we? And then everybody immediately starts designing long questionnaires. So if you're working with people over a 12-week period, say, then what you can do is ask them a question on week 1, and then ask them a different question on week 2, and then ask a different question on week 3. At the end of 12 weeks, you've asked them 12 questions. And that's quite a long questionnaire. But if you do it one question at a time, it's just, this is this week's question. And you can gather quite a lot of information in a fairly relaxed way. The other thing, I think, is formalizing what we all do anyway. And it's what I always call the kettle moment. It's and I'm going to talk about normal life, not things as they are now. But you so often find yourself standing, waiting for the kettle to boil and having a chat with a colleague and say, do you know what Robert told me just now? No, what did Robert tell you? Robert told me that for the first time ever, he has gone into, I'm trying to think of an example, but he's gone to the doctors and he's got himself listed with a GP. And he's done that on his own. And you think, that is absolutely fantastic. That is a really major breakthrough for Robert. And you think, isn't that marvellous? And then the kettle boils, you make your tea, you go away, you go back to work and you do the things you do. We all need to be more alert to capturing that kind of stuff. What Robert told you in that informal chat while Robert was getting on with whatever he was getting on with, he shared a really important piece of information, and you need to capture that. So my tip is put a whiteboard above the kettle, and then when those conversations, or anywhere, you know, it can be in your office, it can be wherever people hang out, and capture those kinds of remarks. After a bit of time, you'll start to see themes emerging. You'll start to see things happening, the same sorts of comments. So actually what you can do is, rather than people write their own comments on the whiteboard, you can have a list of comments, and then people can just tick every time they've heard somebody say that. And then gradually you're building up quite a lot of information quite stress-free. It's not bureaucratic, but it's the real, and I would say the valuable stuff that people are doing. And my last tip is use observation. Somebody told me when I was doing an evaluation of an organisation last year that it was a project for young people. It was a skills project, and they came in a workshop, and she said we had this one lad, and he came in week after week after week, and he never made eye contact with anybody. He never spoke to anybody. He got on with what he was doing, and he always came, but he just never spoke to anybody. And then one day I walked into the workshop, and he was talking to the tutor, and I thought, my goodness. So the next day I went in, I thought I'm going to test this out. And I went in and I spoke to him, and he spoke to me, and he made eye contact with me. Now that kind of observed change from a member of staff who's seen somebody progress, that's a really valuable way of doing it. It's not intrusive. People don't feel spied on. It's about a recognition of what's happening every day. So those are my standard tips.
Thank you, Nikki. It was really fully answered. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I love those real practical tips, Nikki. Just yeah, simple,
Sally.
high effective. Sally? Beyond me? Okay.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Lovely. That was really, really interesting. Those are really good tips. I wonder what the line is on a lot of that stuff with GDPR. Like, how do you manage being in line with GDPR regulations versus holding interesting and important information about people?
The rules do allow you to do a reasonable amount. I mean, I think, store your information carefully and confidentially. Only store what you need. I mean, if you're running a project and you want to keep that sort of information for the duration of the project, that's fine. GDPR kicks in after the project. How long do you need to keep it afterwards? But what you are often doing when you're measuring impact, as I said before, is aggregating information about a lot of individuals. So I always, when I need information to measure impact for a project, I always say, I don't need any names. All I need to do sometimes is to have an identifier, so a key number for everybody. So you can anonymize what you keep and how you keep it, so that you haven't got a list of identifiable information. This is all caveated with the specific rules of GDPR, because in certain circumstances you'll need to do more than that. But as a general rule, be proportionate in what you keep and how long you keep it for. Think about what you really need to know. And often you get a lot of personal information about people that I think you don't actually need. I mean, sometimes funders ask for it, in which case keep it for the funder, tell the funder, get rid of it. I think it's about what you need to know is what has changed. You don't need to know how many of them lived in a certain postcode, or how many of them were diabetic, or that is not necessarily stuff you need to know on an individual basis. And when you report, when you write it up, when you store your information, it's aggregated for a project or for your whole organization. Obviously, some areas, if you're doing any project around health, there are, and some of the stuff around criminal justice, there are very specific rules that you have to follow. And you'll know that within your organization, or you need to find out for your organization what those rules are. In a general sense, I think you can do everything you need to do within the limits of GDPR.
Thank you. That's amazing.
Okay. There was another question that somebody asked in the sign-up questionnaire about monetizing value, which I will just mention. Yes, it can be done. I mean, the tool that notably does that is the social return on investment, which I work with. I mean, I am approved appraiser for, or something, it's some of those words anyway, for the social return on investment. I've done the training, I do it a lot. I'm doing some SROI work at the moment with, very excitingly, with 5 projects in Georgia. That's the Republic of Georgia in the Caucasus, not the country, and that is so interesting. I wish I had more time to tell you about it. So SROI does do it, and you can monetize, but you have to. It gets misused a lot. I mean, what it comes up with is that figure that everybody likes to see, which is for every £1 invested, we generate £4.36 worth of social value. So yes, you can do that. You have to use it with some caution, because people really overclaim on a lot of stuff, and it asks you to be really rigorous about what you're valuing, for whom, and what you can claim. So if you do the impact map that SROI gives you, if you want to see more about this, go to the Social Value UK website, and that will take you on to the SROI toolkit. There is a link to that in our toolbox. But it asks you to state the level of drop-off, of attribution, of dead weight, and so and it actually calculates. There is a calculation written into their spreadsheet which does all of that. It's very technical. It's hard work, and you have to have all of that data in place. You have to know exactly how much of what is happening to how many people, and to what extent, before you even start using it, which is what the toolbox is for. The worst example, one of the worst examples of SROI use I heard was it was a project in a London borough. It was a little local gardening project that was run by volunteers, and they looked after a railway embankment, and they kept it planted and everything. And the borough council, which I think gave them something about like 500 quid a year to do this, wanted them to do a full social return on investment, which cost £10,000. I mean, totally out of proportion. So it works for some projects, it works for more. It's very, very, very difficult to do on a startup. You need a sort of track record of data that you can use. But I wouldn't recommend it for everybody. You do need a certain amount of technical know-how to do it. You can do and you do have to be quite careful about whether it goes back to that first question, is this about the users, or is it about, and I often think that that what public authorities, what funders want to know is this saving us money? Well, it might be, it might not be. It might be costing the same amount of money, but actually it's creating a lot of other social value for the individual people. So you need to be looking at that. And then the final thing to say is, you should never be comparing ratios, because projects are all very different. And just because one is creating £5.36 worth of value and another one is costing £6.43 worth of value, it doesn't mean that one is better than another. And finally, my colleague Helen went to an assessors meeting once, and one of the SROI people at the table said, to be honest, if somebody comes up with a value of more than £5 worth of social value created, I think they're lying. So if somebody claims to be creating £40 of social value, they probably haven't done it right. Those are my thoughts on monetizing social value. I have a lot more, but in the time available.
Thanks, Nicky. Any other questions before we finish off? What I will do is I'll email you all, like, hopefully end of this week or start of next week.
Yeah, I would like to say a couple of things about the toolbox.
Yep.
Before we finish. In terms of price, it's the online copy is going to be £180. It's a one-off. And it's you have access to your own information in a little group on your own, which is private and that no one else can access, but it sort of sits on the cloud. We can theoretically access it as administrators of the site, but we won't be. It's not something. All we're interested in knowing is that you've used it and you've done it. So if you send us a feedback form, that's fine. but you can go back to use it over and over again. And it is, and what you get for the package is a license which it allows up to 5 people to use it. So that's the maximum size of the group that we suggest. So up to 5 people could be working on it, separate people, but we do have limits that you can't share it with other people in your organisation. Sorry, I didn't understand that message, so I'm going to leave that with Jane to interpret. We are testing it at the moment. We have 2, I think. We did have 2 of our testers from HCF in the group today. So they've had a preview of it, and oh, Jane as well. And it will be going live, we think, in 2 to 3 weeks' time. We are just trying to sort out this technical thing that's been really challenging for the web designer and us. Then we need to go through all the feedback that the testers have given us, and then it'll be ready to go live. So it should be very soon. And I'm guessing we may very well be emailing you and telling you it's now live. We could do that, couldn't we?
We will, yes, we'll indeed. So don't worry, we've got your details, so we can keep you informed of when it's live. And I'll send a recording of this webinar, obviously, in Nicky's slides, Nicky's contact details as well, in case you wanted to get in touch with her. HCF Training Development just asked about, so the final document. So when you get to the end, Nicky, how is it sort of exported out as a final document at the end, or is there personalisation at the end?
I'm not sure. So who asked that question? Was it Anna?
No, HCF Training Development asked that.
Yes, that's Anna. So
okay,
she's one of our testers. I think I might have to have a separate conversation with you about that, Anna. I don't quite understand it, and I won't detain people now while I try and figure it out. But we can talk about it separately. It sounds something I hadn't thought of, so something I need to think about. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So thanks everyone for being with us, because obviously, as Nicky explained, this has been a busy project for Nicky over the last, well, for a long time, but actual getting the toolbox made has been occupying a lot of time over the last few weeks, and we're in the final stages now. So any other questions before we finish? No, everyone's happy. Okay, well, I'll be in touch.
Enjoy the rest of Social Enterprise Day.
Yeah, Social Enterprise Day, and thank you so much, Nicky. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.